Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are. I just want to welcome you to the first module of the Intent program. I'm so excited to have finally got to this point. Our goal is to keep each video 15 minutes, so I have to keep it to the point. So welcome back, or welcome I should say. In this video we're going to be learning about the Intent framework, and we're going to go over its origins and some of its underpinning principles very briefly, right? Like I said, 15-minute video, and then I'm going to break down the components of the Intent cycle. So this as a foundational module is extremely important to everything that we're doing. The model underpins the way that we function as an organization, and it also underpins all the work that we do. So it underpins the work that we do with our parents and our educators on their training program. And it also underpins our approach to collaborations with educational institutions. So schools, we're working with some really exciting organizations around the continent and in the UK as well. All of this works towards one goal, and the goal is to reconceptualize the way in which Africans are educated. As an organization, we stand for the education of all Africans, right? And I'm talking from early years for as long as possible with regards to how our society is organized, with regards to the values that we hold, and how we build society. The underpinning principle behind all of it is that we have a responsibility to shape society, and we move society forward at our own will. We have the opportunity to choose the society that we're going to build, and that lack of understanding is a direct result of our education system. Whether or not it's been intentional or not, we will explore all of this throughout the program, but the reality is that we have to intentionally steer our continent, our children, the collective in a particular direction. And we can do that through education. So again, it isn't necessarily education in the formal sense exclusively. It isn't education only in the classroom. It's also everything else that educates us, everything else that influences us. So the goal is always to reconceptualize all of that so that we can steer our society forward. Currently we are focusing on that foundational stage, early years. So the guiding question is, what is the most efficient and effective way to transform education? This is a question that I have had for 20 years. And I have explored it. I've explored the research. I've examined the contextual factors and all of that. And it comes down to the fact that parents and educators need to unite in order to transform the education sector. Regardless of where you are in the world, this is something that has to happen. The reason being is when all is said and done, numbers speaks. Parents make up a very large portion of the population, right? So regardless of where you are, or regardless of which direction you lean socially, extenuating circumstances, you want your children to do well and you want your children to be well educated. If we say that we are united by this one goal across the continent of Africa, and for Africans in the diaspora, we are united behind this one goal. Our goal is to investigate how we can do that. All of the decisions that we make, all of the actions that we take are leading us in the direction of having the most efficient and effective education system, or system of education for our children. And that's basically the underpinning thing. So we have to come together to do that. And so Nori is a space to do that. The space for all of us to come together and say, fantastic, we want a transformed education system. What might that look like? And to develop a set of principles to gear towards that. And then, as we will explore through the framework, it's how it will be applied on an individual basis, as a parent, as an educator, as a school, as a nation, as a society, all that kind of stuff. That's what it is that we're trying to achieve. So the framework actually came out of my PhD thesis. As I said, I've been exploring this question of the most efficient way to transform education since I was literally a child, to be honest with you. What it looked like was understanding that early years is the foundation of all of human development. And I said, okay, fantastic, so I'm going to work in early years. And then I worked in early years for a while, and I was like, this is a bit, there's all of these constraints, and I need to understand that. So I went to university to understand that. And I had that question in my mind when I started my early childhood studies degree. Because my goal wasn't to go down into academia. My goal was actually just to establish a nursery. But as I began to explore it, I began to understand the structural and systemic ways in which education doesn't function well for us. And so I said, okay, so having realized that, what's the most effective way to impact education then? It's then going to be in the ways in which educators themselves are trained. And so my thesis is establishing a framework for the training of educators, and that's the framework that we're establishing here. And so the whole point is that it considers the individual contextual factors as well as the broader contextual factors. It's possible to achieve an education system that considers the individual needs of everybody, right? But that's a structural thing. There are structural reasons why our education system does not consider the individual needs of people. Another side of that is actually empowering people to navigate the education system themselves also. So yes, we need a transformation in the education system itself, but we also need to understand how to effectively navigate the system even when it's transformed, right? So from now, even to when it's transformed. And that's where this idea of parents and educators come in. We, as the collective, as the majority, hold the power. And so we have to have a direction for where we steer that power, because the reality is that other people have a direction for where they're steering us. And so we have to steer ourselves. And this is especially important because we know that the vast majority of Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, are young people that are under the age of 40. The underpinning sort of principles behind all of it is pragmatic research, right? So pragmatic research is essentially, how do we achieve the goal, right? Again, I'll break all of that down throughout the program. Second underpinning principle or underpinning pedagogy is that foundation years, early years, are paramount to the development of the entire nation. If we organize society well around young children being the most vulnerable, society would automatically be organized well. Okay. So broadly speaking, our education systems are working exactly as designed, benefiting those that it's designed to benefit. Having the mentality that the education system is broken is a wrong mentality. The mentality that we need to have is the education system is functioning exactly as designed, and it's benefiting those who it benefits. So if we want the education system to benefit us, we have to build an education system that benefits us. The final principle is that critical, intentional, locally defined and enacted pedagogies are key. What does all of this mean? Critical, having an understanding of the power structures that you are in, having an understanding of how power operates in the system that you are in locally, right? Even in your home, right? How does power operate in your home? How does power operate in your school? How does power operate in your local area, right? All the way down to country, the world, etc. But we are trying to impact our everyday lives, right? So having a good understanding of how power operates locally helps you to then have intentionally locally defined, enacted pedagogies. So depending on where you live, there are different issues based on your community, your environment, your town, whatever, okay? So on a town level, what is it that needs to happen? And so imagine again, if everybody in the town is saying, do you know what, as a town, we are committed to ensuring that the roads are done by the end of this term, for example, okay? What would it take to achieve that? How would you also then get the children on board, right? Inform the children about that. Because yes, we can argue for the roads to be fixed today, but then our children have to understand about maintenance of that road and understand what we did to get those roads fixed, right? So all of that is part of the education system, the local education system. And then of course you have your broader education system that operates within that. So the goal is to have a really well-defined system, but one that is relevant to everybody. And the system is designed And the system is structured and designed in that way, almost like a set of Russian dolls, right? You can go outward into the broader spectrum, and it's the same thing. Or you can come in on an individual level, and it's the same thing. The intent framework is a cycle, so it operates on a cycle, but there are 6 broad steps. So the first step is to identify a clear destination, steering into intergenerational change, which I've touched on consistently throughout that video. Neutralize, which is a strategy for navigation. How are we going to navigate our way into this clear system? So if you think about the story that I told you previously about how I came to conceptualize of this framework, these are the steps. So I began to understand the structural challenges, okay, and that's the neutralized stage. And then theorized stage is how do we develop a unique contextualized plan of action, right? So again, how do we actually, taking you the steps in how to do that. And then execute is the informed implementation, right? So as an organization, we are now in the execute phase, right? So we've done all of this. We know where we want to go as an organization. And now we're in this step, right, where we're in this informed implementation. The reason why the informed implementation step is so important is because it's very easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis, right? You have to take action. So once you have an answer to a question, you act on that part. You don't need to have all of the answers to all of the questions. The answers that we know for sure are that parents and educators need to come together to transform the sector. The early years is the foundation of all of human development. Okay, where are we trying to get to? We are trying to get to a completely revolutionized education system in Africa. That's where we are. Through our memberships and through the monthly modules that we explore, we then explore people's perspectives, right? Because what we need is perspective, we need dialogue, we need to come together and discuss these things. And we explore those things through our memberships and through our monthly themes. So the main reason why we have memberships is so that we can basically do this work, right? It costs money to operate this system, but our goal is to make it as accessible as possible. And because we want people from everywhere to be part of the conversation and to be part of building the framework, right? Or at least understanding the values or the goals and ambitions and saying this is where we want to get to. Negotiate is once you've implemented to review and make adjustments. Things come up, you've got to be prepared for that. And then transform is a long-term strategy to doing that. So again, the underpinning question is, what is the most efficient and effective way to transform education? And we know through research that parents and educators need to unite to transform the sector, right? And we do that through intentional parenting, intentional pedagogy. And the bit that we haven't really spoken about is intentional activism. And that is fundamentally where we're going with this, right? Because once we've done all of this research, there needs to be broader implementations, right? It needs to be implemented across the continent and in whichever way, in however that looks like, right? We don't really know what that might look like, or however that looks like. But then understanding that there will be forms of resistance because there are people who this education system doesn't necessarily benefit, and they'll have things to say about that. So we have to be prepared for that also. But as far as the actual program, we go through all of those steps with every topic, right? So each month we are exploring a specific topic, and the goal in the identify phase is to identify a collective consensus. So, for example, in the safeguarding month, for example, one of the topics that we are going to be talking about is children are gaining access to pornography earlier and earlier, and it's having a detrimental impact on children, okay? So that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be examining the evidence. So one of the goals that we might say that we have is to protect children from pornographic materials. That might be one of our collective consensuses. So as a parent, how do you make sure that your child is protected from it? And as an educator, how do you make sure that children are protected from it? Because we all, again, have the same vision and we are reinforcing it in the home and in the school. And then part of your membership is you getting the support to do that and the toolkit as it's being developed, okay? Our goal is to develop the whole toolkit and then make that publicly available. Yeah, but members obviously then get the support with the implementation. That's the basic overview of the intent framework. In subsequent videos, I'm going to explain to you how it's applicable on the parent pathway and on the educator pathway. But because the goal is to keep everything to 15-minute increments, it's going to be more embedded throughout the program. But this is just so you can refer back to it and you can know where it is that we're going. So I'll see you in the next video.